So what we thought today was, rather than make another speech, especially have that fantastic speech by Ambika, no one's going to stand up there and speak again. So I thought a good move to make this into a conversation. My good friend Vijayaraghavan said we would convert this into a conversation rather than a speech. I just want to start by saying that it's really wonderful for me to be here at TiE Kerala because I had been associated, fortunately, the good fortune to be associated with TiE Kerala from its beginnings. I actually remember one meeting with charter members at the casino hotel the day of the tsunami, back I think 2004, just before Christmas, 2004. So it's a very long association, which I've been really, really proud of. Similarly, I've been associated with TiE in Silicon Valley from the very beginning. So wonderful to be here.
Maybe I'll just raise a few points and then could respond to that as we go. For me, what I remember about you and is, the Science Society which you started off in Trivandrum. Maybe briefly about that. But there's something very interesting I should tell before we start, which no biodata will carry. That Arun's contribution to Technopark was huge. And the reason was that he's the one who arranged Nayanar's visit to California, where we visited Apple factory, we visited Sun Microsystems. And the most interesting thing is about how Nayanar woke up Purnima at 5 o'clock in the morning and told her, I want a cup of coffee. Okay? Purnima is Arun's wife. But Arun has been somebody who's been in the US, but his connect with Kerala has been very high. So maybe Arun, the Science Society a little bit. How did that contribute to your growth in the long term?
I would say that three of the best years of learning for me was the time I spent in Trivandrum. At the time, 69 to 72, when actually the colleges were not functioning that well. So half the time you would go to college and there would be some summarum and everybody would go home. So that time some of us got together and we said, let's create an organization that can be focused on teaching science, so helping us to be abreast of the latest in science. So at that time in Trivandrum, the Indian Space Research Institute organization was being set up with a number of scientists coming back to India from all over the world. There were physicists and technologists and engineers and chemists and so forth. And then the Kerala University itself had very good graduate departments with very, very scholarly people. So we went to them and we organized this Science Society, which had regular talks, discussions, and so forth, ran quiz competitions, brought out a journal called Science Reel. I found that it was an experience where we all were learning together, pursuing our curiosity together, and also creating a really good cohort of very, very good friends. Now that group has dispersed around the world. Not many of them went into science. One of them went into science, that's Tanu Padmanabhan, who's a very distinguished astronomer, astrophysicist. Some went to science, but a lot of people went into other professions like me and my friend Rashid, who became a professor of management and so forth.
You worked with the Tatas. In fact, you worked very closely with Ratan Tata. And I think you worked with him at the beginning of your career, which means also to some extent it was maybe a few years after he got into the Tatas or like that. So that Ratan Tata, what were the lessons there? And what is the kind of change that you've seen in that whole period, which would help entrepreneurs here to get a feel of how large corporates have grown?
So when I finished college in Trivandrum, I actually got admission to IIM Ahmedabad, which was the hot ticket those days and still is a hot ticket. But then this opportunity came up for me to join the Tata Administrative Service straight out of my bachelor's degree from Kerala. So I went there and I was just turning 20. And my first boss there was young Ratan Tata. Mr. Tata at that time was about 35 years old. And I had the good fortune to work for him for 5 years. So I learned a lot of things from him. Actually, I'll share a couple of lessons. So one was, there was a situation where I was, like his executive assistant. So all the papers would come through me. And there was some very big issue and a particular paper was, nobody could find it. And everybody was pointing fingers, Mr. Gomes, I think you had it last, somebody else blamed. But it turned out when I looked through, I found I had it. And I thought, this is the end of my career. So I told Mr. Tata, I have that paper. I'm the one who sat on it. And I thought, that's it. But he said, Arun, I know where you stand. You will tell me where, you will tell me exactly what it is. And from now on, we have a great relationship because I trust you. Tell me exactly where you stand. Now, that was a tremendous experience because thinking that, well, I'm going to be transferred out of this department, no longer work with him, it went the other way. He said, I can trust you to be honest. So that was a great learning for me. The other learning for me was just the way he looked at things. He was very analytical, very scientific. He'd been trained as an architect and structural engineer, so he had the aesthetics of an architect and the rigor of a structural engineer. So to every business problem, he brought that in. He would always ask why not and why not again. So I learned a lot from him. Now, I actually think that he's kept those qualities through. So I've had the good fortune to be in touch with him over the last 40 years or so now. And I've seen, for example, when I worked with him, he had the idea, at a time when radios in India, the cheapest radio was 200 rupees. He said, why don't we make one for 50 rupees? Same way, so when he came out with the Nano, I knew exactly how he thought. Coming out of a car that would cost, a lakh of rupees. So that whole idea of testing the boundaries, he's kept that all the way through. The other thing I learned about him was that once he believes in something, he will just stick to it. And I see that he's kept that through. Now, on the other side, it's not exactly the same Mr. Tata now and then. He's now 80 years old. In December, he'll be 80. So clearly, he's seen and learned and matured and, wizened over the years.
You also had an entrepreneur. I know you did your master's in the US, but after that, you had some point of time you set up some enterprise of your own. Some quick learnings from that.
So I tell you that my learnings from my entrepreneurship, really the best learning is from the first one. The first one was after my degree at MIT, I went to Silicon Valley and I was a controller of a company. And instead of just sitting in the finance department, I would go and meet a lot of other people. I would meet engineers and so forth. And I found they were quite curious to know, what does the finance department actually do? I mean, most engineers don't even care. They're designing computers or whatever they do. But I found that they were curious. And so because I got out and talked to them, one day, one of the computer scientists, actually a very renowned computer scientist, came to me and said, I've got this idea. I want to start a new company. Will you be my business partner? And that was just a tremendous opportunity. So I had no doubt I would do it. So I got started in my entrepreneurship career by working with a very good partner. Today, in fact, I think one of the speakers talked about, Ambarish, talked about the importance of a partner, having a good partner. And in fact, actually, I think, Ambika, you too had an example of a good partner. So I found that for me, it was a wonderful experience to have an extremely good partner with whom I could have complete trust and who together we could build that enterprise. My main learning is get out, meet other people, to find a good partner.
Then you were with KPMG in the US, reached one of the highest positions there. I think you were managing director. At some point of time, you were on their international board. And you move out of KPMG and you get into what I think in India we would call getting into politics, okay? Because the position you held was equivalent to the position that Shashi Tharoor or another minister would have held in India, but for a much bigger country. So how was that move and what did you feel during that time and who are the kind of people you met? Because I know you represented the Department of Commerce and every commercial attaché around the world reported to you. So what was that change getting into politics and what was it about meeting people from around the world? You probably met very senior ministers from around the world. What was that thing and any learnings from that?
So I'll say the first thing was it was a very big change going from KPMG to the Obama administration because the work was very different. So what I learned was, first of all, it was like having an exam every day. The first 6 months, every evening I would get a big dossier, all my meetings the next day, starting at 9 o'clock all the way to late night events, meetings, etc., with big readings, briefings, what the US government position is, or the other government's position might be what you say, how you respond, etc. And the goals of the meeting, because partly the reason I go to that meeting is to shape the meeting towards some goals. So it was a tremendous learning experience, first of all. Just tremendous. So in the morning you're dealing with Hungary, in the afternoon you're dealing with Chile, that kind of different countries. I traveled to 35 countries or so, China, Japan, I mean, you name it. But I would say that, and in each country, the issues are quite different. There are some commonalities, but generally there are special issues. There's always some difficult issues. When you talk about two countries, there are always difficult issues. You've got to go prepared to deal with difficult issues. I remember a visit to Turkey very early in my tenure. I go to Turkey. I go to first to Ankara, then to Izmir, and then to Istanbul. Every place, the people I meet, the press, they ask the same question because the government asked us, tutored them to ask the same question. So you think that you've dealt with it, but actually it comes back again. So finally, I remember getting on a television show in Istanbul, and then the interviewer started with this question, and I thought, great, I have my prepared answer, I gave the answer. But at the end of the thing, she again came back with the question. So of course, so dealing with very aggressive press was one of the very interesting learnings that I had. And you would see in every country, when you go represent the United States, there are always questions and issues that people want to bring up. I'd say I met some very impressive leaders in the process. I had a lot to do with the economic re-engagement between the US and India. In early 2014, when I went to Washington, the overall relationship between India and the US was quite cold. There had been a diplomatic incident with an Indian diplomat in New York that had sour tastes on both sides. There had been a lot of contentious trade issues people were talking about. So the two countries were not really talking to each other. But when the new government came, some of us in Washington and some people in Delhi felt this might be a moment to turn that relationship around. And so people on both sides worked hard, and I was very gratified to be involved in trying to shape that. A result of that was that when President Obama came in January 2015, the two governments set up the Strategic and Commercial Dialogue, which is the very high-level dialogue between the two countries that put business and commerce right in the center of the discussion. Usually these discussions would be about security issues, defense, etc. But this, for the first time, put commerce and business at the center of the conversation. And in all our engagements between the two countries since then, we made sure we had business people involved very close to the main government-to-government interaction. I was really honored that Jose Dominic came to one of our sessions, and we had a meeting where we had the US government people visiting, talk to leading entrepreneurs and executives, and Jose came to that, and I was very proud to have Kerala represented in that room. So I found that was a very special experience for me to engage with business leaders along with government leaders. Some particular government leaders stood out. I had a chance to meet Aung San Suu Kyi of Myanmar a couple of times, the Prime Minister of Singapore, Prime Minister Lee, extremely impressive. I mean, he's one of those people who's been prepared for the job. Then, of course, our own Prime Minister is extremely impressive. So there are many impressive leaders that you either meet close at hand, as in the two examples I gave, or not so close, but close enough that you get a sense of the person and their motivations and the way they operate.
I think some of us here would definitely remember there was a KPMG report which was done when you were in the US, and I think you were looking after India, which actually came out saying that Kerala is the best place for entrepreneurship in the country. If you remember,
Yes.
that there was Jose and others would remember, AVG, all of. I think TiE was getting off the ground at that time, and we were part of that. Say something about that.
So TiE and the KPMG India at that point collaborated to create a report on impressions that entrepreneurs have of the ecosystem that supports them in each state. So a bunch of questions were created, a survey rigorously applied in many, many states in the country. And the result was that Kerala entrepreneurs felt that Kerala's ecosystem was much more supportive of entrepreneurship than, for example, Gujarat, which people would have thought of, or many other states. So when the report was published, it was quite interesting. Nobody in Kerala would believe the report. Nobody would believe the report. So we had a session in Trivandrum to, my friend Pradeep Udas at KPMG came. He was the one who was driving the report. And he's not from Kerala, but everybody said, you must have somehow started this report. But it wasn't, I had nothing to do with the report. Pradeep and his team had put it together. But there was disbelief. And then many questions came about why this cannot be correct, etc. And these questions, by the way, came, frankly, from either press people or from government people. Now, my friend A.V. George was in the room. So after a while, he got up and said, my company was the first joint stock company registered in Kerala. And the last, I don't know how many years, 70 or 80 or 90 years, I haven't lost one day to a labor problem. And somebody else stood up and said, I have this factory in Kerala and in Gujarat. I make exactly the same product in both places. But I have to go to Gujarat 3 times a month because the management there and the people there, they can't quite run it. But my factory in Kerala, I don't have to go there. It's extremely well run. So it's quite interesting, the schism between what successful entrepreneurs and business people thought of Kerala as a business place and what other people who are not in business thought. So my feeling here is that Kerala is a success story that has simply not been, made well known. I'll tell you, Vijayaraghavan and I collaborated on a couple of conferences on Kerala, and I brought some folks from Stanford, and we got people from here. So the first time around, preparing for that, I did some research about how Kerala is doing, etc. And I was amazed to find that all this data showed that Kerala was doing very well. Highest per capita consumption, highest or second highest per capita income, highest rate of small business formation, and on and on and on. But that is not the narrative that you hear about Kerala. And I think that's something that really needs to be corrected. People tell me that successful business people in Kerala don't want to be bothered, so they say, look, we don't want to talk about what we do. But I think we need to go beyond that. We need to really show that we have real role models in Kerala. That word needs to get out.
After being in government for 5 years, I know it was hectic, because when you were in KPMG, we would see you once in a while at least in Trivandrum, sometimes in Cochin. 5 years was hectic, we know. After that, you come to India, chairman and CEO of KPMG. If you look at it as a business that you're running today, what is the kind of situation you would find with the economic situation in India? How is it today? How do you look at what it is going to be as we go forward?
So I would say my vantage point as head of KPMG India, you see a small part of the big picture. So I cannot proclaim to have a really good holistic view, but I can tell you what I see. What I see is, first of all, KPMG India, we have very talented people. And these talented people are facing an opportunity-rich environment. There are companies are trying to do so many new things, transforming, consolidating, streamlining, or governments at the center. There are a number of really nation-building programs. So many states have dynamic leadership who are trying to increase employment in their states, bring industry to states, bring investment to states. So we work with a number of states on investment promotion. We work on helping envision and manage smart city programs. So I find that from my vantage point, there's a tremendous amount of stuff happening, tremendous amount of opportunity. And personally, I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see KPMG do more of that in Kerala, so I hope to be coming much more often.
You were involved with TiE Silicon Valley when it was formed. And TiE Silicon, when TiE was formed out there, it created some sort of a virtuous circle, which has driven TiE forward. What can we do here in Kerala to form that sort of a virtuous circle in investments and whatever used to happen at TiE at that time?
So I'll tell you what I find most impressive about TiE Kerala is that it has the name TiE, but otherwise it has its own genius. I find that so impressive. Many other TiE chapters around the world, they're trying to imitate TiE Silicon Valley. But the brilliance of the TiE Kerala thing is that TiE Kerala decided, I know that Shivdas Menon was championing agricultural entrepreneurship. There's so many things that I find that Thai Kerala has tried to champion that are particularly tailored to Kerala. So the interesting thing here is that Thai Kerala is building its own model. I find that really exciting. So the whole virtuous cycle approach, I mean, that would apply here too. The virtuous cycle of successful people mentoring others, helping to invest sometimes in others, that clearly needs to happen. And I think that seems to be happening here when I see the number of young people in Kerala who want to be entrepreneurs. I remember being here in 2012 when Numan Chandi said, this is the time for young people in Kerala to be job creators, not job seekers. And that has got into the vocabulary. And I credit Thai with putting that into the vocabulary and thinking in Kerala.
Arun, the last question, and this is one, I hope we see you more often in Kerala, but are there any plans, anything that you have in mind which, whether it's in KPMG or some other thing in terms of what can be done here or what you would like to do here or what you would like to see here?
Now, what I would personally like to do is to try to refresh some of the ideas that we've been talking about for many years. How does it look like now? In 2007, after one of those conferences that I mentioned, we brought out a book, really a compendium of articles by various people on Kerala's economy, and we called it Kerala's Economy, Crouching Tigers, Sacred Cows. It might be nice to revisit and see, are those sacred cows still sacred cows? What are the new sacred cows? What do we need to do? Because between those 10 years, Kerala has made a tremendous amount of progress. If you look at the GDP per capita growth of Kerala, GDP per capita growth in Kerala grew 50% or so more than national per capita GDP growth. Tourism, Kerala grew faster than the country, although both Kerala and the country can probably do a lot more in tourism. So in a number of areas, you find that Kerala has actually outpaced the national average in India, but not necessarily many other states. So we have a lot of issues to address in order to be at the top, not just be ahead of the national average, but really the top 2 or 3.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
You need to sit up.
I just want to conclude by saying that, Vijayaraghavan and I have been partners in many, many, many initiatives for almost 30 years. He mentioned how he brought Chief Mr. Nayanar to California. And I actually think that was quite a pivotal moment because when he left California, he said, I am going to go and invest in creating similar facilities in Kerala, because he actually saw, he walked around Apple Computer and he talked to some of the workers, and he said, are you happy working here? And they all were really jazzed about working there. And he got the feeling of how people could be excited working in that kind of environment. So I want to applaud Vijayaraghavan for taking that idea into reality.